On May 26, 2019, the Supreme Court ruled its final decision. Subjects like Filipino and Panitikan were to be excluded as core subjects in the college curriculum. The Commission on Higher Education were the brains behind this idea, and as a result, they have suffered backlash, mostly from college students and professors. This recent issue has ramped up the discourse of language in the Philippines, a country enjoying the conjoined usage of English and Filipino, but at the same time has long been struggling to identify itself with either one. In the Philippines, the dominant use of English in the academe, government, and business is no coincidence. Historically, its widespread use came after Americans reformed their education system and changed it as the language of instruction in the early 20th century. With English so ingrained in our heritage, it's no surprise that the Philippines has become one of the most proficient English-speaking countries in the world. The economic advantages of English as the global language incentivize many to learn it, because of job opportunities that would require them to have English proficiency. It's hard to talk about English in the Philippines without bringing up its effect on Filipino culture itself. Some say English speeds up the loss of cultural heritage and leads Filipinos further away from their language. In Philippine society, English is often mistakenly equated to a higher status symbol, which creates two extremes on the perception of English, with one regarding it as a superior language and the other criticizing its elitist character. Mahalia Marcy, a language scholar and literacy specialist, talks about this in her interviews.
So, in terms of elitism, I think that is a word used to weaponize it to be able to further someone's political cause. But I admit that it is not without basis, especially because we are in a capitalist society. And that kind of language has also been commodified. Also consider that we are a country that is known to be exported for labor. Statements like that look at it as the symptom of the conflict. When people say that, there is something that they don't want to address. Whether it's the inevitability of an unequal system, whether it is the lack of structure, or even more often than not in my experience, and I say this as what we call a third culture kid who learned Filipino at age 13, that also comes from deep insecurity and trauma.
Joel Aureliana, a Filipino lecturer, shares a similar opinion to Mahalia.
Ang pagiging elitista ay hindi na natin mahihiwalay ang wikang Ingles sapagkat sa history natin, sa kasaysayan natin, kung ano yung wikang ginagamit sa dayuhan, yun ang wika ng mga elitista. No?
Also known as colonial mentality.
Ang Ingles ay hindi lang sukatan ng pag-asenso. Kasi nga, ang pagiging elitista sa konteksto ng mga Pilipino, masyadong mataas ang tingin natin sa mga nag-i-Ingles, no?
While it's not fair to weaponize the English language, it's also not fair to downplay its history as a language of the former elite. Rather than pin these two together, what's important is to create access to understand both the English and Filipino languages. This especially becomes significant when language is used in critical situations such as a homicide hearing. Judge Ronaldo Martin recalls having a delayed court trial because of the absence of witnesses and representatives of the victim. The preceding sessions had all been discussed in English, but just before he made his final decision, he asked in Filipino, "Sino sa inyo nakakakilala sa biktima? Is there anyone here who knows the victim?" Then an elderly woman who frequented the sessions came forward, prompting Judge Martin to ask why she had not spoken up sooner. She said, "Hindi po ako marunong mag-English. I am not proficient in English." Through the years, the Supreme Court slowly realized the growing problem of the language barrier in the judicial system. In 2007, it launched a project in Bulacan, a Tagalog-speaking area, where 3 regional trial courts were directed to conduct court proceedings in Filipino. But problems quickly arose when it came to learning Filipino stenography and communicating legal concepts in Filipino. In response to their grievances, the Supreme Court ordered that in 2010, the use of Filipino in the selected Bulacan courts will only remain optional. Afterwards, only one branch continued to use the national language. This, and many other narratives, continue to show why Filipino has not fully penetrated the world of law, science and technology, and the academe in general. Instead, it has found its home in many other things. You hear it during your daily commute, when you ask for directions from a passerby, when you're buying candies from the sari-sari store. Arguably, Filipino became the language of the masses. And it makes sense why it came to be that way.
Filipino in particular is one of those languages where it was made to lay claim on an identity that we historically feel robbed of, struggled with.
Since Tagalog makes up a huge chunk of the Filipino vocabulary, few realize that loaned foreign words are also part of Filipino. Words like computer and jeep were sourced from English. Kumusta and pwede came from Spanish. These loan words become a signifier of the country's past, how it came to be colonized by the Americans and the Spaniards, and it also reflects the country's struggle for independence throughout its entire history. Much like battle scars, the Filipino language is a proud reminder of what we, as a nation, have been through, and while it boosts nationalism, it also keeps us in touch with our roots and our heritage. Still, Filipino remains inaccessible in the academic world. From preschool all the way to college, most schools use English instead of Filipino to teach subjects related to science and math.
Karamihan sa mga paaralan na nagtuturo ng iba't ibang subject, engineering, accounting, economics, at iba pa, either yung mga textbook, yung mga nagtuturo, ay nasanay sa paggamit ng wikang Ingles.
Even if there are actual Filipino words that serve as decent translations for scientific terms and concepts, only few know about them, and even fewer use them. For example, you'd seldom hear people refer to science and math as ciencia and matematica, and even rarer to hear them say agham and sipnayan. Most simply prefer to call them in English. And the complications don't end there.
Example, if you move further south, Filipino is not as widely accepted. They even sooner speak English because their language is Bisaya or even Cebuano.
Hindi masama yun, no? Maganda yun. Kaya lang, ang nakikita ko, dahil medyo mas malapit sila sa wika nila, hindi natin nabibigyan opportunity ang Filipino na sa batas ay itinalaga natin pambansang wika na mag-grow or mag-develop as a national language.
With all that, which really is better, English or Filipino? And you might be tired of hearing the same generic why not both type of answer, so here's a fresh take. We are compelled to use English for now to compete globally, but we must slowly transition to Filipino as the language of the future. But the thing is, we have a lot of obstacles along that way. Take a look at the last national surveys for English and Filipino proficiency. This one was finished 11 years ago, while this one is almost 2 decades old.
That's where education and even political policy, willpower needs to come in. It's not fair to say no confidence. I think it's lack of support, lack of funding, lack of training, and that's also one of the biggest challenges.
The exclusion of Filipino and Panitikan from college curricula is the most recent display of just how confused the Filipino society is about its own language.
Nasa stage na tayo na ini-intellectualize pa natin ng language sa atin. When we say ini-intellectualize, ginagawa nating matalinong wikang Filipino. Ngayon, kung ibababa natin sa high school, mag-i-step backward tayo. Imbis na pasulong, pabaliktad. Kung naunawaan lang ng mga nasa gobyerno na kung merong magpapalalim ng discussion ng Filipino, not only as a subject, no, as a medium sa pagtalakay ng mga mahalagang issues sa bayan, sa college yun.
Fortunately, advocates continue to offer new solutions that will push for a more accessible and globally competitive Filipino.
Gamitin natin ang globalisasyon para i-promote ang ating meron sa atin. No? Marami nang gumagawa niyan. No? May mga personalidad na tayo nakikita sa internet, sa YouTube, na gumagamit yung teknolohiya to promote the Filipino culture.
This means that globalization shouldn't be viewed as a threat to heritage and identity, but rather a useful tool. As another way to actively react to globalization, it's also better to incorporate more words from local dialects into the Filipino technical vocabulary.
Magbigay example, no? Yung salitang gahom is a Bisaya word. Gahom is the translation ng hegemonic. Yung hayahay, alam ko, hayahay si Bisaya term, no? Ang kahulugan nun ay parang relax lang o epetics lang.
Doing so would create new technical Filipino terms, while making it easier for people who prefer speaking provincial dialects to learn the national language. And then there's
Mother tongue education.
Mother tongue-based education.
mother tongue education, a multilingual-based education where elementary school children are taught using their provincial languages. Since its implementation a few years back, there has been growing interest that it could serve as an entryway for school children to become better speakers of Filipino as well as English. A study has found that certain schools in Kalinga yielded higher test scores for students under mother tongue education than those who followed the traditional bilingual system.
I think before addressing the what should be a dominant language or unified language, we have to really listen into what people are actually saying. Mother tongue is a great opportunity for that.
With that, mother tongue education may just be the solution to strengthen both our national and regional languages. English will always be the English that the Filipinos will continue to butcher and perfect. It has already made its mark in Filipino culture, and it's not leaving anytime soon. It will always be the language we use to fill in the gaps when expressing ourselves, and it will always be the language that connects us globally, because until we find a better solution, English will work. And we can let that be for now, as we transition to the language of the future, which is Filipino. Filipino as a language is very much alive. It constantly evolves, adapting to the times. It flaunts great potential, but it also needs immediate support. Despite having government bodies that already promote the Filipino language, their influence is likely not enough to sustain a commitment to the language if they operate without support from the Filipino people themselves. We must assume a radical shift in perspective about the national language if we want to preserve the integrity of Filipino and their own identity. Hi, thanks for watching. If you liked our video, please subscribe to our channel. Also follow us on our Facebook page. Its link is down below. Alpas is run by a small group of friends, so we'd appreciate your support to help us create more videos like this in the future.